Sure, we all love texture sheets, but do you ever wish for something more? Watch today as I play with unexpected supplies in the studio to create new, unique textures. Stick around to the end for 4 additional materials you should experiment with. Hey there, Sandy here. Welcome to another polymer clay video at keepsakecrafts.net. For this texture, I had in mind that I wanted to create the look of handmade paper. I went through my studio and pulled out all kinds of things to experiment with and came up with some really interesting effects. And eventually did find something that had the look of handmade paper. What I found that finally gave me my look actually was this stuff. This is flocking powder. And I did it a couple different ways. Here's a ball of clay that I coated with the liquid clay and then rolled in the flocking powder dry. And that is a very different look. I mean, I've got a flocked ball of clay, which is kind of cool. But this one, I mixed it in. And I'm going to show you that one. The flocking powder is just very tiny bits of fiber. So that is why I got the look of handmade paper. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can take your ball of clay, roll it around in just a little bit of liquid clay, make sure it's entirely coated. And this is kind of like, you know, breading some chicken, right? You get it something wet on it, and then you dredge it in your coating. So as long as that's completely covered, and we'll drop that in there. I meant to drop it right on the flocking powder. Get on there. There we go. And just kind of roll it around. This is what happens if you just roll a ball of clay in the flocking powder without putting the coating of liquid clay on first. It doesn't stick very well. But what you can also do is put some of your flocking powder in your bowl and then add just a little bit of liquid clay. So that I only add a little, what I'm doing is squeezing it up and then scooping out, you know, maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon. The very first experiment I tried with this, I started with way too much liquid clay and ended up with something so gloopy and hard to work with. So really be careful that you don't have too much liquid. You just want something that combines whatever your inclusions are and allows you to stick them to your piece. That might be just a little dry, so let's just do a teeny tiny bit more. And this whole process is definitely messy, but that's kind of part of the fun of it. Make a mess, see what you end up with. Now let me show you a couple things about this. First of all, you might think it's a good idea to pre-bake your shapes so that they'll hold their shape, and it is, except that this stuff isn't going to stick to this baked clay at all. It's much too dry. So what do? Well, one thing you can do is apply it to unbaked clay, and then you can see it sticks much better. Now, if you want to keep your texture like that handmade paper texture, then resist the temptation to roll it in your palms, but just kind of pat those bits on there. Otherwise, you'll end up smoothing out a lot of your texture. But feel free to experiment. You might like the look. I would love to hear, after you've finished this class and you've played a little, and share with us in the Facebook group, Keepsake Crafts Create, what you've found, because it can be a lot of fun. So see, you can just do it like this, and I'll just show you here. You roll it in your palms, and a lot of that texture just disappears. But you may want it smoother like that. So what do you do if you want a shape like a heart? What you can do is actually cover your shape with clay. So make your shape, pre-bake it, and then cover it with just a thin layer of polymer clay. So just cover it. Not a bad idea to actually add a layer of liquid clay to your shape, only to keep out air bubbles, because the liquid clay will make the fresh clay stick better, so then you won't have air bubbles. Just the thinnest amount, just to make it tacky. If you love learning new techniques and tips for your creativity, you might consider becoming a patron. Every month, my patrons get an exclusive bonus tutorial. Check out this list of lovely people who have decided to support me on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/SandySowen to join us. And now you can apply your texture and it will stick. Like I said, messy. If you find you're having trouble getting the coverage you want, you may consider coming back in after baking with another layer. That might be a whole lot easier than trying to get it all in one go. And unless you want your inclusions permanently in your liquid clay, I'm going to try to use a clean craft stick each time you go in there. There we go, that's a bit more of a paste. So you just keep playing with it, adding bits here and there until you're happy with the look. And if you're finding that it's being difficult, then go ahead and bake it and then come back in and add another layer. And you'll end up with something like this, which is a very cool craggy texture. The very first thing I tried was this, and this mess here. I actually first ripped up some paper napkin. You could try toilet tissue. And I mixed that in with some liquid clay, but I had started with way too much liquid and it was just goopy and so hard to deal with. So then I came back and mixed in some solid clay. There's white chunks of white solid clay in here. And that made it a little bit easier to manage so that I could press it onto my pre-baked heart form. And then I could take that, and so this would be the second time around, and you can see now I can fill in areas that I'm not happy with. And get even a bit more rustic look of that handmade paper look. Especially, this is a good one to let sit for a while because the liquid clay will soften the solid clay and allow you to do what I'm doing here, kind of smear it and shape it. And those little bits of fiber from the paper napkin, or you didn't take much either, probably a square or two of toilet tissue. And so you can really start shaping this and refining it. So here's my torn paper heart out of the oven. After it came out and cooled, I painted the whole thing with Golden's Iridescent Pearl, and then I antiqued it with burnt umber. I think if I had to do it over again, I would definitely use a lighter brown, or perhaps even skip the antiquing altogether, because I don't love this. Here's one that I did not antique, and instead I colored it with dye oxides. These are a Christy Friesen product, and what I like about these is that they are very, very thin viscosity. So they get into those nooks and crannies. You want to shake these really well, and of course you can just use alcohol ink. You could use thinned down acrylic paint, and I'm just kind of brush it around and let it get into the nooks and then wipe it out. You can wipe off a lot of it or just a little. You can mix the colors. Let's try purple and blue together. Get a really beautiful effect. Or you can just antique it. Of course, any of these you can finish in any way that suits you. If you want to remove more of the color, you can use a damp wipe. You could also dry brush over it again with pearl paint to just leave the color in the recesses. For this one, I used just the blue with a little touch. You really can't tell. I used the Chartreuse, but it's a fairly light color. It just kind of gave you more turquoisey areas, and I wiped back a lot more of it. And then I added a cabochon and sculpted on some vines and mushrooms for a woodland vibe. This one may be a little bit big for this, so let's see. And actually this This cabochon, you really can't see it, and I ended up breaking it. But I saved it and used it here, and you have to look very closely to see the area where I cracked it and wrecked it. So don't throw those things out. You can always find another use for them. If you're not in the mood for sculpting things, you could simply glue a little charm or a bead on. You could take your craft knife, like this one's kind of sitting a little proud, and actually gently carve away an area. And then use a good glue, like an E6000, to glue that in place. These are real simple to do. You start by gathering some scraps of brown clay in different shades, darks, lights, metallic, and then just mix them up and roll them through your pasta machine a couple times until you have a sheet that is a blend. And then grab pieces of that, squeeze out all of the air, and then I like to use an acrylic block to just roll it into a log. Now, if you have it crumbling like this, that means there was air trapped in there, is all. But we're making vines, so they don't have to be perfect, until you have a thickness that is in proportion to what you're making. This would be a little thick, but I'll just show you so you can see. Then you can use some kind of tool. My favorite tool for this is this Christy Friesen Can't Live Without It tool. And I love this kind of blunt but sharp end. And it's so simple. You just draw lines, and it kind of drags and kind of cuts. You just draw lines, and suddenly you have a branch texture. So I use my branches to just make a bezel for this cabochon. And you just arrange them in whatever way looks good to you. The mushrooms you can make out of any color that you want. Pardon my purple and blue fingers. You want to roll a ball of clay. This is translucent. It's actually opal from Premo. It's translucent clay with little mylar flakes in there. And you could use just plain translucent. You could use white, gray, any color you want. What you'll need is a ball tool to shape your mushroom cap on, and you just press your nice, warm, conditioned ball of clay into the cap. Now you can press it like this and have that shape mushroom cap, or you can point them. And you can get a little whimsical, tilt it off to the side. I just love, this is the same clay. I don't love the way it turns yellow, so often I use Pardo instead of Premo. But I do love the translucent and that sparkle from the mylar flakes in there. So you just shape your little mushroom caps. Add a little tiny bit of liquid clay inside the cap. Roll your stem. And those mylar flakes make it really easy to trap air in there, so make sure that you've rolled out all the air. Cut a clean cut and put that clean cut on the inside in that liquid clay that you've put in there. And that will give you a cute little mushroom. And if you want to make them smaller, these ones were made on this 1/8 inch ball tool. Here are a few of the things I played with. And if you've ever done scrapbooking, you may have a lot of the supplies on hand. And if you don't have any of the things I have, I challenge you to go through your studio, see what you have that you can experiment with. This is just some sand, and I actually kind of shook it and pulled out the finer stuff. So here's a ball of clay, and if I roll it in the sand, the problem with doing it this way without having this mixed in with the liquid clay is that after baking, it may not stick all that well. So you might brush it off, and then you'll end up with a completely different texture. Another one that gave me a very cool effect that I definitely want to play with some more is just some inexpensive plastic glitter. I wasn't getting this for the glitter, but more just the chunky, small pieces. This, what I did, same thing, I mixed some of the glitter in with liquid clay, and you want to make sure that you don't use too much liquid clay or it ends up being sticky and really hard to work with. So just add just enough so that it will all stick together. Then you can pat that on your ball of clay. And if you want even more texture, you can roll your piece in the glitter dry afterwards. And that's what I did here. And I knew it would kind of melt because it's plastic. Also, I wasn't thinking, and I had these all on a tile, and so it cured with a flat spot. But you would just cure these in a piece of cardstock or paper that was folded, and then it would hold your beads, keep them from rolling about. This one was a little unexpected. This one I also took just a raw ball of clay and put some embossing powder in a dish and rolled it around and baked it. And again, embossing powder is kind of a plastic, and then it melts when heat is applied. But because this was on a round ball, gravity kind of pulled a whole bunch of it down to the bottom. These are all just experiments. One of my favorites here is this one. These are microbeads. They're little tiny glass balls, really teeny tiny. They're almost as annoying, if not more annoying, to deal with than sand, in that they get everywhere. This one, I took my ball of clay and rolled it around in a dish of liquid clay till it was fully coated, and then rolled this in the microbeads to completely cover. And once it's cured and out of the oven, you may want to go in and just kind of rub off anything that's going to come off that's loose. You could also go over the whole thing again with another coat of liquid clay to make sure everything is stuck. Now that you've seen all these ideas for experimenting, you'll want to check out my playlist for more surface effect ideas that you can add to your creations.